Welcome back to Google Scripts, and I hope you're having fun with this project. So this time, instead of a do get, we're going to do a do post. So a lot of this stuff that we used within the do get, we can reuse as well. And I'm going to put the do post at the top. I'll open this up bigger so that we can better see the code. Also increase the size by a little bit. So instead of do get, we're doing do post. And this time, this parameter here, this E, is going to be really important because this is where the data that's being sent to us is being held. So we can keep this as is. We can have the try, we can have the catch. So the catch actually doesn't have to change. The only thing that's changing is the try. So we're still using the same spreadsheet with the same ID. So make sure that you placed your own ID in here and you can get it within the URL. So that ID is always sitting there, and that's always tied to that same sheet. So even if you move it around, it's still going to always have that same ID. So next, we've got a sheet. So we're grabbing our first sheet. So that's exactly what we want. And then next, we're getting a range. So we don't actually need all of this information anymore that we do. We only need the headers, because the headers is going to be that first column. So we need to update the range. And we need to update that value, and we can leave this one as last column because this number returns back how many columns we want to return back. So we don't know. We want it to be as dynamic as possible, and we want to return it back. So it's gonna be in an array format. So remember before, when we do get range, it returns an array. So it's an array, and then there's arrays inside of that array. So we only want to return back that first one because we're only after that first header area. So that header information that we want to pull back. So the next thing that we need to do is we're gonna do a little bit of customizing here. So let's create a default array. We're setting up a default array. And then within this array, we're going to push in the values, because the way that we can add values to our Google Sheet is we can do an append row. And pending the row, it's looking for an array formatted value. Just like we saw when we're retrieving this, it's an array format. We can also post it within an array format. So the same thing there, and we can really make use of it. And this time, instead of data, we're going to just be returning back some results. So let me update this results, and we can have a bunch of information here. So we can even return back all the data that's been sent to us. So that's all contained within E parameter. So we can see what was submitted. We're going to stringify results, and then we're outputting that JSON data. So there we go. So let's try this out now and see what this looks like. So now if we try to post, what should happen is we should simply just return back at this point the data that we're sending in. And this is where Postmaster is going to be useful once again, that we can grab. We don't have to even change that URL. Let's make Postmaster a little bit bigger. And we've got some body information that maybe we want to send. So we've got first, hello, last, world. So see what happens when we post to it. So posting, and we see that we're getting that information returned back. So what's happened here is that remember we set up this data. So let's open up our source code again, and way too many windows. So let's see what happened. So what is happening here is that we've still got the same URL, but this time it's a post. So Google Script recognizes a post as opposed to a get. So it knows we're posting data. So it knows the method. And it also, so we're connecting to the sheet. So we're not actually even using any of this stuff. And all we've done is we've grabbed E parameter and we've simply stringified it and returned it. So we see that within the E parameter, we've got first and last. So it's taking whatever information is contained within the body, and it's simply making use of that and returning that back within a JSON format. So that's all we've done here. And the next step is to do something with this data. So we want to make sure that we are actually looping through and posting the information in the right cells. So we don't want a situation where a user comes in and they want to post to whatever, a random name, and we don't have that name in the headers. So we want to avoid those types of situations. So we want to make sure that if the user is posting to first, that that data is actually sitting in first, last, company, group, email. So we have to have some fail proofs here, and this is where we're going to use the headers that we've picked up here, and we're going to loop through them. And we're going to check to see if any of these E parameters that have come in actually match the headers. So if any of these objects here match the headers, so basically what would happen in the scenario of Postman is that this would come in. So we've got one key that has a key of first, one that has a key of last. They're actually going to match within our header information, and we're going to see that within the E parameter. So we know that if we actually look for E parameter last, we're going to get world. And if we look for first, we're going to get hello. If we look for company, we're going to get a null value. So let's do that. So let's loop through our headers. There's a number of ways to do this. We're just going to simply do a for loop. And headers length. So remember, these are returned back within array format. So when you get, let me make this big. So when you do the get values, as we saw within the get, this is all in array format. So we know that we've got a length for headers, and we can make use of that within the for loop. And this should actually be, well, x is less than the length. And then here we've got our loop. So let's check to see what values are available. And if they are, then we're going to simply push it into our array. So let's create a variable, and we'll use temp value. So this is just a temporary holder for the value, and we'll do a ternary operator. So we'll look to see if E parameter headers, so whatever the value of this, and we're going to see if there's no value to it. And if there's no value to it, then we're just going to simply leave it blank. And if there is a value to it, then we're going to set that as the temp value. Actually, this should be a colon. It's ternary operator. So basically, it's a simple way of doing a condition. So if this is true, then we see this. If it's false, we see this. And because we've got the exclamation mark there, so we're essentially checking to see if there's a value for there. And if there isn't, then it's just going to be blank. So now we know that we've got some type of return value there, and we can add it into our temporary array, so our holder array. And all we need to do is add temp value into it. So now our holder array is going to be actually holding the data within those cells. And we can also return back our holder array so that, of course, we can take a closer look. So this is just going to be whatever the holder array is. So we'll be able to see that information. So let's go back into Postman and see what it returns this time. So all we have to do is the same request. So let's publish a new version. So this version is test 5, or test, we'll call it test 5. So update. And with Postman, we can't use the dev version. So let's put that version in and do send. And we'll see what we get returned back. So we see that if we do within the holder array that we got the first and the last. So we got values for those first two cells, and we're ready to deposit it into our Google Sheet. And this is actually really easy. This is just going to be one line of code that's actually going to deposit it in. So we identify the sheet that we want to deposit it in, and there's a method or class called append row, and we know that it takes those values within an array format. So I can drop that in, and that's it. So we should be actually adding those values into that array. So let's try this out. We'll just get rid of some of the spacing. We're going to have to publish it, of course. So that's the only real downside of doing this, we have to continuously do this publishing. If we're developing the app just in the web app version, we could use the do get, but because we're actually posting data to it, it makes it a little bit more complicated. So let's see what happens. So there we go, and let's do send, and there we go. So we deposited some information. Let's try doing group test send. So it dropped it into group test. Let's do a key random whatever. So it shouldn't actually deposit this one in. So just test it just to make sure. So it did send that data, it did retrieve it, but we didn't drop it into our Google Sheet because none of the headers matched. And that was one of the things that we wanted to do within our application, because we don't want users just randomly sending in values that don't match up with our columns. So this way it's nice and neat, and if a column's left out, then it just stays blank. So next, we are ready to bring it back into our application. So go ahead and try this out for yourself with the Google script, and it should be fairly straightforward. It's just JavaScript, and at the end of the day, all we're doing here is we're simply pushing it into an array and then appending the row. So those were the two main changes that we had added into over and above the do get within the Google script, and the rest was just extended version of what we had done earlier. And then, of course, we've got our errors here. So if we're throwing any errors, we're going to see those errors coming back within our JSON response as well.